Now everything we've learned so far is pretty much either an on or off situation. For instance, you apply an effect or a color filter or a speed or something and it's either on or it's off on that clip. If you want to switch between them you can break a clip apart and assign one thing, like say a filter or a crop, to one part of the clip and then another thing to another part of the clip. But you can go between different states very smoothly using what's called video animation. You may have also heard of the term keyframes, which is what we're going to use to create a video animation. Animation is when you go between one state and the other gradually. Let me show you an example. That would be the easiest way to see what I'm talking about. So here we've got this clip here of the bird. It would be nice to go and get closer to the bird. Now we could do that using the crop and Ken Burns and have it say start and then end could be cropped really in close to the bird and it would look like we're zooming in over time. But what if we wanted a lot more control than that? And what if we wanted more than just controlling the cropping? So as an example, let's use scale. Let's say we wanted the video to start normally, but starting right around here we wanted to get closer, so scale up so the bird was larger. So let's place the white line right here by clicking. Now what we want to do is put a keyframe here. So we can see keyframes by going to clip and then show video animation. And you get all this information above the clip. And there's really nothing here to see it, just some different categories. But we're going to add a keyframe right where we want to start zooming in on the bird. So we want to switch to the correct tool, transform tool. And when we do, we'll see this control up here. This is the keyframe icon and then there's left or right arrows here to move between keyframes. We have no keyframes. So let's add a keyframe right at this point. Watch what happens when I click here. You see this dot gets created here under transform. Remember we're using the transform tool. So we have a keyframe now for transform. Now let's move to another point like this and let's add another keyframe. Now we've got two keyframes. Now we can go back and forth between these keyframes using these arrows here. So I click here to go to the previous one, here to go to the next one. I can click here to remove it. You can see how there's an X there instead of a plus. So an X will remove the keyframe if I need to. But for now I can easily jump back and forth between these keyframes. Also notice here under transform when I'm on a keyframe like I am now I get these nice diamonds here and I have arrows and I can jump back and forth between keyframes. So it's showing me there's a keyframe for position, rotation, and scale for this clip here. So let's change the values here. Now for this keyframe we'll leave it the same. But let's jump to the second keyframe. And in the second keyframe we're going to scale up. So this one's going to be, say, at 178%. So 178% here at this keyframe. If I go to the previous keyframe either with this arrow here or with this arrow, we can see on this keyframe it's 100% scale. So I can see here 100%, 178, 100%. Now what happens if I go in between? If I go in between it figures out the proper scaling depending upon my position. So if I move the playback head forward you can see it scales up. It goes between 100 and 178. So it properly does that. Before this first keyframe it's at 100 the whole time. It starts off at 100 and it remains at 100 until this keyframe. Then it has to go and animate to get to the next keyframe. And then after 178 it stays at 178. Doesn't do anything else. So now I've got a little animation. I can have this one clip here and it could have the bird from afar, then zoom in to get a closer look at the bird. And I can create further keyframes as well. So I can go a little bit further along here and let's say, okay, at this point I want to start zooming back out. So let's add another keyframe here and then I can move forward to this point and say, okay, this point we should be back to 100%. So I'll add a keyframe here. Now let's use the arrows to go back to the previous one. That's at 178. Good. This one here, 178. Let's now set this back to 100. So now between these two keyframes we'll be zooming back out. So now we zoom in, we stay at 178, and we zoom back out. And that's animation. And all we've applied it to at this point is the scale. But we could apply it to other things as well. For instance, let's also have it rotate. So let's go to this keyframe here, or we can create a new one. going to use the arrows to make sure I lock in here. And let's set the rotation to say 30%, like that. And now it will scale up and rotate. And then it's going to rotate back because this keyframe here has the rotation set at 0. So if we wanted the rotation to stay the same, we could do another 30% here, or 30 degrees rather. So we go here, then 30 degrees and 178%. And then it's going to go back to 0 here. So we can do rotation. We can also do translation as well. We can move the position. So I could go to this keyframe and then I can adjust the frame somewhere else. So I can move it here, for instance. And now you can see it moves, it rotates, it does everything, and then it's going to go to another position and another position. You can even see here the line showing you the position for each keyframe and it moving along. So let's go and get rid of all these keyframes here. Instead, let's go to one of the generators here. And I'm going to use Element and add a shape. And I'm going to put the shape right here. It's a circle. I'm going to make it the same length as this video. And let's change the shape type to an arrow. And then I'm going to select it. Let's rotate it so it's pointing like at an angle. Let's shrink it down here. Scale it down quite a bit. And maybe, make it a darker outline, that kind of thing. And let's have it point at the bird. But the problem is it's not pointing at the bird at the beginning. And it's not pointing at the bird at the end. It's only pointing at the bird at that one spot. So let's go to the beginning here. And let's have it point at the bird like that. And what would be nice is if it followed the bird. So we can make it do that by simply using keyframes and transforming the arrow. So let's start off here and we'll go to the transform tool. Sometimes even if you had the transform tool selected, you have to select it off and turn it on again to get the keyframes. So I'm going to add a keyframe here. And the arrow is perfectly positioned right here. So I'm going to move forward by using the arrow keys. And when the arrow is getting a little bit out of the way, I can add another keyframe. But just to make it nice and neat, I'm going to go to the video properties here and I'm going to add a position keyframe. Just the position, not all these other things. So I'll click here and it will add a keyframe just for the position. I could select the clip here and I could go to Show Video Animation and I could see it right there. Let's expand this a bit so it's clearer to see where these keyframes are. And I can switch to just position instead of all if I wanted to. And now at this new keyframe I'm going to drag to a new position. Now the great thing is between these two the arrow is going to move. So I can continue to do that. I can use the right arrow on the keyboard a little bit to move forward some more. And then I can add another position keyframe and drag this along. And then I'll continue to do that. So I'll move forward a bunch more and I'll keep doing it. Always adding a simple position keyframe and moving the arrow. And I'll keep doing it. And how closely I want to follow things is really up to me. I could put a new keyframe every frame if I wanted to. That's probably overkill. But doing it every few frames probably makes the most sense. I notice I have this red line here following the path of the arrow. So I can move through here. And you can see the arrow follows the bird. So that's another use of keyframes. To have it on some sort of element like this and have the position change. But you could do keyframes for almost anything. For instance, under Effects here, let's choose an effect like Comic Looks. And if we applied Comic Basic to this, it would be for the entire clip. But I could look under Comic Basic and there's the effects and there's the mix and I can go down to 0% where the effect isn't applied at all and 100% where it's completely applied. And notice there is a keyframe button right here. I'll add a keyframe. And then if I look under Clip show video animation, in addition to the other things now, I could see Comic Basic and there is a marker for a keyframe. So now I can go to another point here and add another keyframe. Now at this keyframe I have at 100%. Let's use the back arrow and go back to this one. Let's say at this keyframe 0. So now if I play the video you could see the comic effect gradually takes over from 0% to 100%. Which is much nicer than having it suddenly snap into place. So whenever you add effects, if you want to go the extra mile, you can use keyframes and do a video animation to have it gradually go from one to the other. Even if it's just over the period of like a second, it'll look a little bit nicer than if it's immediately applied from one frame to the next. And then you can also use video animations for just about anything else inside of Final Cut, whether it's an object or a title or something moving around on the screen, or positioning, rotating, or scaling, or cropping any clip or anything, whether it's the main timeline or a cutaway above it or anything like that.